The first time I met him, I could tell this bear wasn't normal. He was sitting like a person on the frozen shoulder of the Haines Road, just outside Haines Junction in the Yukon, back resting against a snow-banked sign that said, "Watch for wildlife," muzzle tilted as if he were reading it. I had stopped because even for the Yukon, a young brown bear in winter, sitting like a commuter at a bus stop, felt wrong. He didn't charge, didn't bluff, didn't even clack his teeth. He looked me in the eye, the way a kid looks at a grown man who knows where the food is. I said, "Hey, big guy," and he did something I've never seen a bear do. He leaned forward, put one paw on my boot, and sighed like he'd just clocked out from a long shift. I should have called the conservation officers first. Instead, I took off my parka and put it over his shoulders like he was a shivering teammate, and that sealed it. That's how Bruno came home with me. I live alone in a cedar cabin just past Pine Lake, a place I built with my brothers back when they still thought I'd settle down like them. My nearest neighbor, Zane, is half a kilometer down the road and believes in two things: strong coffee and minding your business. When I pulled into my driveway with a bear riding shotgun, seatbelt stretched to its limit around his chest, because for reasons I can't explain he let me buckle him, Zane wandered over with a mug and said, "New dog?" I said, "Bear," and he nodded like it made sense. Bruno followed me out of the truck and right up to the door, pausing only to sniff the boot scraper like it might be another animal he had to introduce himself to. Inside, he did a full tour, nose in the pantry, nose under the couch, nose in the laundry basket. Then he parked his rear on the rug and made a little huff that sounded exactly like approval. Not normal turned into a theme fast. He didn't know what to do with fish, but was obsessed with pancakes. He refused to sit on anything that wasn't already warm. And he had a steady, patient way of wedging his massive body against my knee until I half sat, half fell onto the couch, so he could climb halfway into my lap like a creature who had never been told about personal space. He wasn't tiny. By spring, he was a thick-shouldered, cinnamon-backed heap of a bear. But the way he believed he fit on me, on chairs, in the passenger seat, on the bath mat when I shaved, made it seem like mass was an opinion, not a fact. I called the wildlife veterinarian in town, Dr. Amir Khoury, a calm man with a precisely trimmed beard who never raised his voice, even when he told me things I didn't want to hear. He drove out one grey afternoon with a tranquilizer kit he didn't use, crouched on my porch while Bruno pressed his nose to Amir's hairline and breathed him in. After a long exam done like a dance, Bruno responding to gentle pressure and quiet words like he understood, Amir said, "He's young, under 2, in decent shape, but not hunting well. Did you feed him pancakes?" I didn't answer. Amir smiled. "You need to ease him off human food. If he stays with you, he'll never learn to be a bear. If he goes, he might not survive the learning curve. Either way, this is on us now." He meant on me, but he kept saying us, and that made it easier to breathe. Bruno and I settled into a routine that would have made no sense to anyone who didn't live it. I'd wake at 5 to stoke the wood stove, and he'd pad out of the spare room where he'd claimed my brother's old futon, yawn with that toothy bear yawn, and then gently smack the door frame with one paw to announce he was ready for breakfast. I switched us both to oatmeal with blueberries, which he accepted with the stoic disappointment of a man who has just learned dessert is cancelled. When I worked in the shed planing boards for my clients in Whitehorse, Bruno stationed himself exactly in the doorway, a brown doorstop that refused to be moved. If I went to town, he wanted to go. The first time I told him no, he sank to the floor in a slow, theatrical collapse, chin on his paws, eyes up at me as if he'd rehearsed the role of tragic orphan for weeks. It worked. I took him. We practiced things that no sane man should practice with a bear, waiting at the truck until I said okay, stepping back from strangers. All men, tourists out here are mostly fishermen and truckers, ignoring the smell of bakeries. He learned gentle, the way some men learn to shake hands, with effort and weird pride. He did have an enemy, though, and the enemy's name was Victor. Victor is Zane's tomcat, a scarred orange brute who strolls wherever he pleases. The first day Victor marched into my yard, Bruno grew 6 sizes in shock and reverse scurried behind my legs, peeking out with the horrified fascination of a heavyweight who has just been called out by a child. Victor stared him down from the porch, like a foreman waiting for excuses. Bruno grumbled. Victor blinked. Bruno took one heroic step forward, lost his nerve, and tried to wedge his entire head in the space between my thigh and the door jamb. From that day on, the pecking order was clear. Victor, then everyone else, then Bruno's courage somewhere under the rug. Bears are supposed to be solitary, but Bruno viewed me as mission control. If I was at the woodpile, he was helping by carrying a log 3 meters and then sitting on it. If I dug post holes for a new fence, he insisted on standing with his paws on my shoulders like a giant furry coach. Zane would walk over, grin, and say, "Your security system is very affectionate." The truth is, it felt like having a son who weighed 300 pounds and refused to believe in boundaries, a son who thought my bed was a public park and my armpit was a legitimate pillow. At night, he'd wind up in my room, no matter where he started, hauling himself onto the mattress with a sound like a ship docking, then flopping across my chest until my ribs wrote hate mail. I bought a bigger bed. He expanded to fill it, as if the principle of gas expansion also applied to bears. I don't pretend I didn't make mistakes. In the early weeks, I made everything too easy. Too many soft meals, too much indoor time. Amir sat me down at his clinic and drew a simple map on a pad. Cabin, lake, berry slopes, salmon stream. "You must take him here," he said, tapping the stream. "Teach him with the real thing. He's attached to you, Mason, but attachment is not a life strategy for a bear." I took that personally, which was foolish. He was right. So we went. In May, when the river thawed and woke up furious, I waded in up to my thighs while Bruno paced the bank making sounds that any reasonable person would call swearing. I scooped, missed, fell, stood up laughing, tried again. He finally stepped in, delicately, like the water might be a prank, and I repeated gentle until he moved with the strange care of a large man navigating a room full of wineglasses. It took 3 days, but when his paw finally sliced under a silver back and he felt the living weight of the salmon, Bruno froze, eyes huge, then lifted the fish as if he'd pulled the sword from the stone. He didn't eat it. He brought it to me and placed it on my boot. I felt ridiculous pride, and also terrible at my wet sock. He was still ridiculous at home. One afternoon, I was fixing a hole in the drywall. Bruno had tried to fit through the gap between the fridge and the wall to reach a pot of stew, and physics had lodged a protest, when my brother Elias arrived from Dawson. Elias has 3 sons and a laugh that frightens moose. He took one look at Bruno sprawled on the floor like a furry landslide and said, "So your dog got big." Bruno rose, walked over, and draped himself over Elias's lap with the entitlement of a cat who pays the mortgage. Elias flailed and then surrendered. "He's not normal," he said. "I know," I said, and felt fiercely proud, which is maybe also not normal. I learned to cook with an audience. Bruno watched every turn of the spatula like a student in a masterclass. If I burned a pancake, he pretended not to see. If I flipped something perfectly, he huffed approval. I swear the bear understood competence and cared about it. When I built a table for the community hall, he lay underneath while I sanded, his paw occasionally reaching out to rest on my boot, as if stabilizing me. When I had a bad day, the kind where nothing fits and everything splinters, he did what he always did, climbed onto me, steady, heavy, immovable, like the world saying, "You're not floating away today." I never told anyone, but it was the best therapy I have ever had. A full-body weighted blanket that smelled faintly of river and pine and used my shoulder as a headrest. Men in town had opinions, and they told me. Rory, a conservation officer built like a log splitter, parked by my gate and said, "We can't have a bear who thinks he's a boy." I said, "He thinks I'm his," and Rory rubbed his jaw and said, "That's worse." Then he looked through the trees and saw Bruno watching us from behind the water barrel, only half his body visible, as if hiding successfully. Rory sighed. "He's not charging, he's not huffing, he's doing peekaboo." He gave me 3 pamphlets, Living with Bears, Not Feeding Wildlife, and If You Love Him, Let Him Go. I put them on the fridge next to a picture of Bruno asleep with his head in my boot. It hurt to look at all of it. When the berries thinned and the nights came early, Amir visited again. We walked the ridge behind my cabin, looking down on the lake, where the last of the loons called. Bruno followed, stopping every few steps to shoulder me, a habit that reads like affection and body checking at the same time. Amir said, "He's strong. He fishes. He forages. He sleeps well." He paused, and I felt the weight land before he said the words. "We should try him out there. He'll come back if he needs you, but we should give him a chance to choose." The wild isn't a punishment, it's the point. I know this, but knowing and accepting are different animals. We picked a place far from cabins, where a creek splits into 3 thin braids and the alders hide deer beds. I brought no pancakes, only space. Bruno sniffed the air in long, careful draws, then looked back at me the way he did that first day, asking without asking. I stepped forward and put my forehead to his, which had become our ritual for courage. "Go see," I said, voice not entirely steady. He ambled off, stopped, returned, pressed his weight against my hip in a slow, deliberate lean. Then he went again, further, until the brush took him and I only heard branches whisper. I stood there for a long time, the way you do when you're trying to be brave about what you can't keep. He came back that evening, of course. Of course he did. He walked into the yard, climbed onto the porch, and lay across my boots with a grunt that said, plainly, "The world is big, and I am still your boy." We tried again the next day, and the next. Each time he stayed out a little longer. Each time he returned and slept heavier, as if the wild put lead in his bones in the best way. He started bringing me things. A fish head, a sprig of something sweet-smelling, once a smooth river stone that he placed on the workbench like a paperweight. He also kept invading my bed, as if independence and cuddling were perfectly compatible ideologies, which, to be fair, they are. There were hard moments. One night a storm came down the valley so loud it shook the glass. Bruno paced, eyes whites showing, and finally climbed fully on top of me, not across my legs but across my whole body, pinning me to the mattress in a hug that would have counted as an assault in any other context. I laughed into his neck and said, "All right, full bear blanket," and he rumbled a sound that wasn't fear anymore, but relief. Another day, some men at the gas station saw us parked. Me filling up, Bruno sitting upright in the passenger seat like a hairy linebacker, and one said, "Tame him and sell tickets." I said, "We're not a show," and Bruno put a paw gently on the dash, as if to emphasize our shared dignity. When we drove away, I realized my chest hurt with the kind of anger that comes from love. The last week before snow, we hiked up to a meadow of red grasses and fat rose hips. In the middle, someone had left a pile of old tires, and for reasons known only to him, Bruno decided they were a challenge. He rolled the top tire off, stuck his head through the ring, and strutted around with it like a champion weightlifter wearing a medal. I doubled over laughing, and he looked genuinely pleased with himself. Then he tripped, fell sideways, and lay there with the tire still around his neck, staring at me with the expression of a kid who has made a mistake and hopes the man he loves will turn it into a story instead of a scolding. I did. I told him he was magnificent. He preened. We both went home happier than we had any right to be. In winter, he slept more and deeper, choosing the crawl space under my porch as his den. I cut a hatch so I could talk to him. Sometimes, when the wind moaned and the moon glazed the world, I'd lift that hatch and tell him what I'd done that day, how the table turned out, how Zane said Victor has mellowed and won't be tormenting anyone until spring. Bruno would exhale a long, warm breath that fogged the air and smelled like apples and cedar chips. I'd rest my hand on the floorboards, and he'd put his paw against the other side. Men don't talk about it much, but the truth is simple. We all want to belong to someone who leans back when we lean in. He's out more now. Sometimes I don't see him for a day or two. A set of tracks will loop past the cabin, a print will press into the drift by the shed, a log will be flipped just so. When he returns, he's a little wilder each time, the quick alert of his ears, the decisiveness of his step, but he never forgets the way to my door. This morning, I woke to the weight I know better than my own. He climbed onto the bed, sprawled across me, and let out a groan of pure satisfaction. I lay there, ribs creaking, heart noisy, and counted the 1,000 small ways a life can change without asking permission. The sun pushed through the blinds. Somewhere down the road, Zane's truck started. Victor made that scratchy yowl he makes when he wants breakfast now. Bruno lifted his head, considered the demands of the day, and flopped it back down against my shoulder, content. People ask me, the rare ones who hear the whole story, why I didn't send him away, or why I didn't keep him completely. The answer is that love isn't possession and freedom isn't abandonment. He is a bear who thinks he can fit in a man's lap. And I am a man who learned that strength sometimes looks like letting your boy go fish his own river and come home smelling like it. In Haines Junction, the mountains keep their counsel, the spruce grown, the snow forgets and then remembers the shape of everything. A not normal bear is out there, tracing his loops between berry slopes and the porch where my boots wait. When he comes back and drops his heavy head into my palm, I say what I've always said since the first day on the roadside, when he pressed his paw to my boot. You're okay, you're my boy, gentle. And he is. And we are.